In a peaceful English village, a 16-year-old girl was brutally murdered, and the one item that may have connected the suspect to the crime? His father cooked, broke, and tossed it out. What followed was a decades-long search for justice, fueled by secrets, passion, and a family that hid a murderer in plain sight. It was January 18, 1993, a chilly and dreary Monday evening in Greenhithe, Kent. Claire Tiltman, 16, had just celebrated her birthday 4 days ago. She wasn't going to a party or slipping out for mischief. She was doing something entirely ordinary, heading to a friend's home to discuss college preparations. A short stroll, a calm neighborhood. Everything seemed normal until something went horribly wrong. Claire headed along London Road, taking a shortcut down a tiny alleyway, a road she had previously traversed. However, this time, someone was waiting, and they weren't just there to terrify her. They were there to take her life. Claire was stabbed nearly 40 times in that dark lane. The cuts were so deep that they almost touched her spine. The assault was quick, brutal, and evidently motivated by something more than instinct. This was not a mugging. Nothing was taken. There were no evidence of struggle, nor were any shouts heard. A small girl was left bleeding on the sidewalk, only minutes from death. The first person to locate her believed she had been struck by a vehicle. That's how horrible everything looked. Her front was covered with blood. She was gasping for oxygen and unable to talk. By the time paramedics came, it was too late. Claire Tiltman was gone. Her life, her hopes of becoming a fireman, her future, all had been taken away in a matter of minutes. And here's where things become chilly. There were no fingerprints, no murder weapon. There's no trace of who did it. Whoever assaulted Claire did not panic. They did not leave a trail. They vanished into the darkness. The whole town was disturbed. Claire was well-liked, feisty, intelligent, and full of life. She was not the kind of girl who got engaged in dangerous situations. She had a close network of pals. She volunteered with the fire department. She was her parents' only child, and they treasured her. Nothing in her life pointed to this level of aggression. So why did this happen? Police conducted a huge investigation. The alley was cordoned up, and searches were conducted around the clock. However, they had practically no leads, no concrete proof, and no notion who might hate Claire enough to murder her. And yet, one thing was certain. Whomever did this had planned it. They carried a weapon. They waited silently. When they spotted her, they did not hesitate. That type of wickedness does not simply go. It festers. It waits. And what happened next would show that Claire's murder was not a one-time act of violence. This was simply the beginning. Stories like these should be told and remembered. If you believe in casting a light on the most serious instances, please subscribe and help us keep their voices heard. Everything changed in Greenhithe when word of Claire Tiltman's murder broke. Police acted quickly, beginning a full-scale investigation known as Operation Artist. Officers blocked off the passageway and searched every inch of the murder site for any traces of evidence. However, what they discovered, or did not discover, only exacerbated the situation. There was hardly nothing to work with. No murder weapon. There is no usable DNA. No fingerprints. Whoever did this understood how to vanish without a trace. It was the kind of quiet that signals peril. For investigators, this implied one terrifying possibility. Claire may have known her murderer. The assault seemed to be personal rather than random. Calculated. That's what terrified folks the most. If the perpetrator was not a stranger, they may have been a friend, neighbor, or someone well-known. The word spread quickly. Claire's students were hauled out of class. The teachers were in tears. Her peers were stunned when they heard the official report that one of their own had been slain. It did not feel genuine. Claire was not irresponsible. She wasn't a risk taker. She was the type of girl who volunteered for the fire department. She had plans, ambitions, and a bright future. It could happen to anybody, not just her. Parents began walking their children to school again. People avoided shortcuts. Nobody wanted to be alone at night. Then, murmurs began to circulate about another incident that had occurred years before. In 1988, just a few miles away, a 27-year-old woman was attacked on her way home from work. She was carried to a quarry, gagged, molested, and stabbed, then left for dead in the mud. By some miracle, she lived. But her assailant was never apprehended. Now, many were asking a scary question. Has he returned? The details were too identical to be ignored. A severe stabbing. A calm place. A victim who was unprepared for what happened. The possibility that this was the act of the same man, still out there, hunting, was enough to immobilize the town. The police worked day and night. Hundreds of interviews, dozens of leads, but the truth was sliding between their fingertips. And as time passed, it seemed more likely that Claire's murderer would get away with it. But not everyone was willing to let it happen. Just days after Claire Tiltman's murder, authorities received a phone call. A man claimed to have observed something at the murder scene. A man with black, curly hair standing near a zebra crossing at the time of the incident. It looked like a useful advice. However, when investigators followed up, the caller altered his narrative. Now he said he had never seen the guy. That evening, he went out to distribute pamphlets with his mother, a well-known local councilwoman. He said nothing about a crossing. His chronology shifted. His recollection became hazy. Something was not adding up. What is the man's name? Colin Ashley Smith. On the surface, he seemed innocuous. A youthful dairyman. The town mayor's son. Had a steady girlfriend. People who knew him characterized him as little weird, but nothing more. He resided in the same neighborhood where Claire was slain. I attended the same British Legion Club. Even attended Claire's burial, standing silently amid the mourners and trying to sorrow. Colin, however, was not a harmless person behind closed doors. He had a frightening preoccupation, which he fought hard to conceal. He never left the home without his knife. Not for protection, not for work, simply because he enjoyed having it. Police had already talked briefly with Colin. Nothing stuck. There's no concrete proof. But now, with his tale changing and his strange behavior coming to light, something seemed odd. He wasn't just interested in the case. He was injecting himself into it. And this is not something that innocent people normally do. The more investigators investigated Colin, the worse the image grew. A resident who resided near where Claire was slain. A guy made a fraudulent assertion. A man's own parents were suddenly vouching for his whereabouts, attempting to offer him an alibi. But things get worse. Because, although police couldn't prove anything just yet, what they discovered about Colin astounded them. He was more than just a touch weird. He was concealing horrific secrets and documenting them in graphic detail. The information on those pages would have a significant impact. When authorities eventually searched Colin Ashsmith's home, they anticipated something weird. What they discovered was alarming. Inside were pages of handwritten journal entries stretching back years. However, they were not merely musings. They were comprehensive play-by-plays of violent assaults, some successful and others not, with each one scored like a perverse video game. One post characterized an attack on a lady as 95% successful, while another reported a failed attempt as a 20% rating at an aged care facility. He even characterized the 1988 Quarry assault as his masterpiece. But what is the most haunting part? He promised to do a better job next time. The next time may have been Claire. As police looked through his notebooks, a worrisome trend emerged: stalking women, plotting ambushes, and even drawing up fictitious scenarios in which he stormed into houses, tied people up, and played out violent fantasies. One post suggested phoning the police after an assault to redirect the inquiry. But then came the tipping moment. Just as authorities were about to examine Colin's house in connection with Claire's murder, his father intervened. Aubrey Ashsmith, a former police officer and respected community figure, did something inconceivable. He took the knife Colin usually carried, boiled it, disassembled it, and discarded it. He destroyed what may have been the only piece of evidence linking Colin to Claire's murder. Why? Because he understood what that knife might show. When questioned in court, Aubrey confessed everything. He did not even attempt to deceive. For it, he received a 12-month jail term for perverting the course of justice. The court described it as an intentional act, one that may have destroyed the decisive evidence in a little girl's death. Throughout all of this, Colin's mother, Diana, remained steadfast. A previous mayor, a public figure, she gave interviews, saying that the police were targeting her son. She accused them of harassment. But behind closed doors, she wasn't only defending Colin. She was also providing him with an alibi for the night Claire was murdered. Their stories did not match. The timelines did not align. They still held the line. It wasn't simply one individual concealing his misdeeds anymore. It was a family protecting a murderer. Once investigators understood this, they knew they needed to go further. Because if Colin was capable of this, and his parents were ready to cover it up, what else were they hiding? More than 200 individuals attended Claire Tiltman's burial, including family, friends, classmates, and strangers who were disturbed by what had transpired. The chapel flooded with anguish. The air was thick with grief. But there was something more there. Something off. Because someone in the throng did not belong. Among the mourning was a familiar face, Colin Ashsmith. The same individual who altered his account to the police. The same guy who resided only minutes away from Claire's murder scene. The same guy who, at the time, no one recognized had developed a fixation with violence and control. He stood there silently, like everyone else. But, unlike everyone else, he knew just how Claire died. Because he is the one who did it. Even worse, he knew Claire. Their family both attended the same local British Legion club. They talked. They had celebrated her birthday there only a few days before the incident. Claire probably never gave him a second thought. But what about him? She wasn't just a neighbor. She was the objective. Colin did not vanish after murdering her. He pushed himself deeper. He and his father even volunteered to assist Claire's bereaved parents, comforting them through their loss and seeming to care. Standing at their side, smiling, mourning, while being fully aware of the truth at all times. Claire's mother subsequently said something that sent shivers down everyone's spine. I felt strong feelings. The murderer attended the funeral. Sitting there. They are watching us. She was correct. Colin's deception did not end there. He invaded the heartbreak. He observed the carnage he had made. Then he resumed his normal life, as if nothing had occurred. But the mask would not last forever. Because Colin didn't comprehend that every step he made, every falsehood, every twisted notion scrawled in his diary, was contributing to the case that would eventually bring him down. For years, investigators suspected Colin Ashsmith was guilty for Claire Tiltman's death. However, just believing it wasn't enough. They have no murder weapon, no confession, and, under the law at the time, Colin's troubling past, his violent assaults, his knife addiction, his notebook full of morbid fantasies, could not be used as evidence in court. But everything changed in 2003. A new legislation, the Criminal Justice Act, was approved, along with a game-changing rule. Judges might now consider a suspect's bad character during a trial. This meant that prior assaults, worrisome actions, and even written ideas might be utilized to identify patterns. And Colin? He wasn't only a nasty person. He had a history of stalking women for enjoyment. The police had been ready for this, because the jury would no longer regard Colin as a weird guy with a knife. They would see him as someone who had previously killed 2 people, followed others, and documented everything in writing, like trophies in a killer's scrapbook. His notebook gave a complete picture. He wrote of hauling people to remote locations, scoring assaults as if they were games, even thinking about doing worse, assaulting people, breaking into houses, and disposing of corpses. Previously, such opinions couldn't be spoken in court. Now they can. Suddenly, everything changed. Colin was no longer merely a suspect. He was a guy with a distinct pattern, a sequence that led directly to Claire Tiltman. However, it was not simply about the law or facts. It was about something deeper. After years of hiding behind falsehoods, Colin's actual nature was finally revealed, for the court, jury, and the whole world to witness. The clock on his freedom had officially begun ticking. For years, Claire Tiltman's case lingered in the cold case files, plaguing investigators but yielding no fresh information. Colin Ashsmith was still imprisoned for 2 previous savage assaults, but he had never been charged with Claire's death. And without any strong physical proof, it seemed as if justice would never arrive. However, an unexpected lead emerged. It came from within the jail. Colin's old cellmate, Stefan, came forward with a disturbing statement. He said that during one of their chats, Colin casually mentioned a zebra crossing. Nothing unusual at first, until detectives discovered that information had never been made public. Because, exactly near to where Claire was assaulted, it was a zebra crossing. That one phrase, spoken during jail small conversation, was the case's first genuine break in nearly a decade. Stefan told detectives Colin seemed upset and was seeking for someone to take it out on. He said Colin saw a female at the crossing and took a photo. He didn't name Claire, and he didn't have to. The location, tone, and timing were all there. Police realized they needed to act immediately. In September 2013, they conducted a thorough investigation of Colin's old family home. They discovered a newspaper kept from the 1-year anniversary of Claire's murder. It hadn't been thrown away. It had been retained, almost like a prize. Additional evidence bags were recovered from the premises. Investigators concluded that Colin had exposed himself, rather than just slipping up. It was the breakthrough they needed. With his diaries, previous assaults, and now an insider confession all pointing to him, the cold case was abruptly reopened. This time, they were not going to let him walk away. After more than 2 decades of quiet, lies, and cover-ups, Colin Ashsmith was eventually charged with Claire Tiltman's murder. It was November 2014, and his time had expired. The evidence against him was not just substantial, it was overwhelming. The prosecution brought it all out in court, including the bizarre journal entries, knife addiction, pattern of random stabbings, stalking, and violent fantasies. This was not a guy who snapped once. This was someone who hunted. Someone who planned his assaults like projects and then graded them. Colin attempted to defend himself. He attributed his actions to poor self-esteem, trust concerns, and anger towards women. He even claimed that the true perpetrator had never been apprehended, and that he, of all people, was enraged on Claire's parents' behalf. No one purchased it. He told the jury that he used to go on midnight walks, creeping around the streets with a knife in his pocket, waiting for someone to irritate him so he could justify striking out. He desired control. He desired power. And, when questioned whether he liked women, his response was chilling. Yes and no. I didn't trust them. I felt as if they had control over me. The prosecution ripped him apart. They pointed out how Colin always positioned himself just near enough to the crime to seem helpful, but never innocent. How he attempted to divert suspicion by describing a bogus suspect. How his own father destroyed a knife that may have sealed his doom years ago. Claire's parents did not survive to witness the trial, but her friends made their presence apparent. They brought images of Linda and Cliff to court and displayed them on the seats, unwilling to allow those who battled for justice be forgotten. After 5 weeks of testimony and 3.5 hours of jury deliberation, the judgment was reached. Guilty. Colin Ashsmith was sentenced to life in prison, with at least 21 years before he could be considered for parole. He declined to present for his sentence. He couldn't even handle the impact statements from the family he'd devastated. The judge did not hold back. He said, "This was a deliberate murder committed because of the power it provided you. You ruined Claire's life, wrecked her family, and left a hole on our town that will never heal." Colin subsequently filed an appeal, claiming that the evidence against him was prejudicial. The court rejected it as absolutely unarguable. The reality had finally caught up to him. This time, there was no running. Cliff and Linda Tiltman persisted for years. While the inquiry continued with no answers, they appeared in front of cameras, made public appeals, and relived their worst nightmare again and over, all in the hopes that someone, somewhere, would speak out. They preserved Claire's memory with pictures, handwritten notes, and a plaque from the fire station she had aspired to join. They never gave up hope of finding her murderer. However, in 2008, tragedy struck again. Linda Tiltman died from cancer at the age of 56. She had endured the weight of her daughter's murder for 15 years, and she died before the guy responsible was brought to justice in court. Cliff stood alone on the 4-year anniversary of Claire's death. He spoke straight to the camera, his voice trembling, and said, "I miss Claire so much, she's gone. Her mother is gone. There's now only me." Cliff died the same year, in 2012, at the age of 62. The guy who swore to fight for justice did not survive to see it through. However, those who loved them ensured that they were not forgotten. When the trial eventually started, Claire's closest friends arrived with framed images of Cliff and Linda. They positioned them on the court bench so that their presence could be felt throughout the room. They refused to allow the trial continue without them. And when the decision was eventually read, it was more than simply justice for Claire. It was justice for 2 parents who battled harder than anybody should have had to, and still did not survive long enough to see the beast defeated. This case did not only ruin a young girl's future, it carried her parents with it. But, in the end, the truth eventually caught up with the guy who started it all. Claire Tiltman never had the opportunity to mature. She never achieved her aim of becoming a fireman. She never got to fall in love, have a family, or enjoy the life that was taken away from her in a dark alleyway. But the village of Greenhithe made one thing clear: Claire would not be forgotten. In the years after Colin Ashsmith's conviction, the community banded together to ensure Claire's legacy went on, not as a victim, but as a beacon of resistance. A memorial bench was erected in her honor. Tiltman Avenue has been renamed. Claire roses, her former favorite flowers, were planted along her old walking path. And in 2022, a brand new eco-center for children was named in her honor, transforming sorrow into something significant for the future generation. Her pals continue to send Christmas cards to her former house. Former instructors spoke about her with tears in their eyes. Even after decades, the agony remains real, as does the love. Claire's tale is undoubtedly one of tragedy, but it is also one of unwavering pursuit, of a town that would not remain quiet, of parents that battled until their next breath, of the detectives who refused to end the case, and, perhaps most eloquently, of a little child whose brightness could not be dimmed, even by the darkest of wickedness. Her murderer was apprehended. Her name lives on, and those she left behind were sure of one thing: she was not forgotten after she died. If tales like Claire Tiltman's are important to you, if you feel that the truth should never be buried and justice should never be forgotten, be sure you subscribe. We delve deeply into cases that others leave behind, those with unsolved mysteries, horrific twists, and victims who should be remembered. So press the subscribe button, enable alerts, and join us as we find the tales that need to be told. With that stated, thank you for watching, and until next time.